Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Have you ever walked through an art or craft store and wondered, what are all these brushes for? There are swords and daggers and rakes. It's downright scary. Well, you're not alone. Today, I'm going to go through the 12 most common shapes of brushes and show you exactly what they're used for. I'll be demonstrating them in watercolor, but I'll also tell you what you might want to use them for in acrylics and oils as well, because some shapes of brushes naturally tend to lend themselves better to different mediums. So without further ado, let's go to the table and I'll show you how it's done.
Here I have a wonderful assortment of 12 different brushes from our sponsor FabArt. They come in this nice little travel case, and I will have a coupon for 20% off of this in the video description. And if you're a follower on my blog, I will be giving away one of these travel sets, so make sure you follow me over there if you're not already a follower. I'll be putting up a contest in a day or two. So what we have here are 3 different handles and then 12 different brush heads. The thing I like about this for traveling is that you don't have to have a bunch of long brushes that could get their tips damaged in your brush case or in your bag, and you have the versatility of all of these 12 heads. You can have 3 going at once, and it folds up and is all protected in a very compact space. So I'm very pleased about this, but what I really want to show you today is what these different brushes are used for, because it can be confusing. We're going to start off with a very common brush, the round, and what we have here is roughly, I would say, a number 10, maybe a number 8 or number 10 round, and the way these brushes go together is you simply put it on the end and twist. If you have any trouble untwisting it, which I haven't when I've been using these, you can use this little little wrench here to help you, but I haven't found that to be necessary. So round brushes are kind of your workhorse, especially if you use watercolor, because with a watercolor you can use your round brush to give you a beautiful wide wash of color, but then you can also use that round brush to go straight up and down at a 90-degree angle, and you can do very sharp fine lines. So this is what you can do with a round. I like a big round. If I could only pick one brush, like I was just going to do one brush with one painting, this would be it. The number 8 to 12 in that range, round brush. You can press it down for thicker strokes, lift it up for thinner strokes. You can do petals. There's just so many different things you can do with a round brush. So this is probably one you're familiar with, and this is definitely your workhorse brush. I wanted to switch over to some watercolor paper because I was working on mixed media paper, and I want to show you another technique you can do with your round brush, and this is called a controlled wash. So what you want to do is first get out as much paint as you think you're going to need to cover the area that you want to paint. It's very important because you're not going to have time to stop and mix while we're doing this technique. Then what you want to do is determine where you want your wash to go. So I'm going to do a square. I'm just going to draw a rectangle or a square here. That's a rectangle. I know my shapes. And you're going to make sure that your paper is not taped down to anything. You need to be able to like tip it and lift it. So what you want to do is use your round brush, because it's a very thirsty brush. You're going to pick up a bunch of paint, and you are going to paint a bead along the top area that you want to put your wash on. And then you're going to put as much paint in that bead as you can, because while that paper's wet, it's going to let that paint flow. So you want to have so much paint on there that it's as much as that bead will take without running down. And once you've saturated it, you are going to paint a line right underneath it. And since you're tipping your paper, gravity's going to pull it down. And you're going to get a really nice, smooth, even effect when it dries. Basically because you're always keeping one edge wet. Now, I've done a couple lines across, and I can see that that bead is starting to dry out. I don't have that much that much color in my bead, so I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more. And you do have to work fairly quickly. And now I'm going to drag that down again. And because I have this round brush, I can press, right? I can press and cover a little more area. Just make sure you don't press too much, because you don't want any of that that paint to get trapped anywhere. You want it to be able to flow. I'm going to put a little bit more color in there. Now let's say I want this to get lighter. I can go ahead and add more water to my wash, or I could go into a whole different color entirely. So I've added a little water with my spray bottle, and I'm going to go ahead and add that to my bead. So the only thing you want to worry about is that you don't lay this flat and leave it be, because then that's going to backwash and give you a rough bloom, which is kind of like a flowery edge shaped spot, water spot kind of. And just keep working down until you get to the end of your shape. If you're at this point and you see you don't have too far to go, you don't need to reload the bead because you got plenty to get you there to the end. Now when you're done and you have little puddles, what you want to do is dry your brush. So you make it thirsty, you take all that moisture out, and then you're going to set your brush into the puddles, and that's going to drink up the extra paint and water. So then you'll have a nice flat area, and that's called a controlled wash, and you do that with a round brush. So the thing you want to keep in mind when you get new brushes, no matter who you buy them from, is that they're going to have a little glue in the end, and that is called sizing. And basically what it does is it protects your brush in shipment so that it doesn't get damaged on its way to the store. But then before you use it, you want to rinse them out. Sometimes you actually need to wash them with like a little baby shampoo or brush cleaner, but these are all pretty soft. I can feel there's a little sizing in some of them, but just usually giving it a quick rinse in the water does the trick. Now this is a type of round brush called a liner. Now you can see how different they are in size. Bristle length is actually pretty close. That's another reason I like a round brush, is that you can hold a lot of paint in there and bring it around. But sometimes you want to hold a lot of paint, but you only want a fine line. Maybe you're painting like the riggings in a boat. Sometimes these brushes are called riggers. Anytime you want a long thin stroke. So what I'm going to do is just grab some paint here and show you what I mean. This is really good when you want to do vines or any sort of lining. You do need your paint a little bit thinner than you would with other brushes. So here I'm adding some more water so you can see, because you need that water as a vehicle to help you make those lines. So that's a liner, and that's what you get when you use a liner. So the next one we're going to look at is similar to the round and the liner. It's also a round brush, but it's called a spotter. And they call it a spotter because it's mostly made for making little spots or little adjustments. You wouldn't be able to carry a ton of color with this because the bristles are too short. So there's no place to store it. So what I'm going to do is just grab another color here. And you can use your paint a little thicker with this, or or you can use it thin. It doesn't really matter, but you can do little spots. You could also do short strokes, like kitten whiskers or something like that. And you don't have to worry about getting in over your head with too much paint. You could do a, this would be really good for doing like a branch, like a pine tree branch or something. So if we did, made ourselves a little branch, we could do, and see I pressed a little bit firmer, pressed down more, so I got a thicker branch, just like I did with my round brush, because it is a round, it's got a round ferrule, the bristles are arranged in a circular form, and then I could just flick off some little pine tassels. But I do need to reload my brush more often because the bristles are short and it's not going to hold a ton of paint. That is called a spotter. These are very useful for acrylics. These brushes here could be used for watercolors or acrylics. I don't know if I'd use them with oils. I'm pretty careful with my oils because sometimes they can damage synthetics. It just depends on how good you are at cleaning out your brushes. The next one we're going to look at is a different shape altogether. It's called a dagger, and see how it kind of looks like a dagger. And interesting fact, if it has longer bristles, it's called a sword. And I really like this special effects brush for doing trees. Now I'm going to rinse it real good just to make sure there's no sizing in there. And we're going to do some trees here. So this has a bunch of different features to it. So you've got the angled edge where you could get some detailed lines. You could do some branches that way. See how it automatically kind of wants to make a gnarled looking branch? I'm going to get a darker brown so you can see. But if I'm doing a tree, the thing I really like is that I can kind of press it down and kind of twist as I bring it up and then pull off some branches. And it just automatically kind of gives me those little bumps where I would want to drag off like a smaller branch. It does have a tendency to want to give me double lines sometimes, so that could be handy if I'm doing like some shrubs and I want a bunch of different loose, gnarly branches. But that's what I really like with this. This also has the advantage of a liner brush, because you can do really long, thin lines if you use a chisel edge of the brush. So if I go like that, I can do really long lines. I could do fence, like barbed wire fence. I could do the masts on boats, just like the liner. In fact, this would probably give you as sharp of a line as a liner if you have a steady hand, and it will hold more paint because you have more bristles there. So that is what a rigger is used for. Sometimes it's called a rigger. It's always called a dagger just because of the shape of the bristles, but it can be referred to as a rigger as well. Just like the liner can be, just like this can also be referred to as a rigger. The next brush we're going to look at is the angled brush, and I actually switched to some watercolor paper because the technique I want to show you needs the watercolor paper. I was just using some inexpensive mixed media paper for the other, to show you those first couple brushes. So like the dagger, we have tapered bristles, but like a flat, those bristles are fairly straight, and there's not that big of a difference between the tallest bristle and the shortest bristle. This has a lot of different advantages. Like the dagger, I can get some brown paint and I can sketch with that. I can use that tip, I can do tree branches, but I get a much more controlled branch with this than with the dagger. So that could be a benefit or a detraction depending on if you need to loosen up a little bit, if you need help making your trees look more random, or it would be a benefit if you prefer to have a little bit more control. So there we can just sketch a very quick tree in, and you can see when I go on the tip like that, I have a lot of control and detail there. So very useful. Now the other advantage that this has is that it's very good for a technique I call side loading, and that technique is pretty useful, and it does take a little bit of time to get used to. So what you want to do is clean your brush and you want to blot it. Okay, you don't want to super dry it off, but you want to get out the excess moisture. And then what you want to do is grab some paint. You want to make sure your brush is wet enough that your bristles stick together. If your bristles are splitting apart, your brush is too dry. Okay, so then what you want to do is load up the angled, the tallest side only. So I'm just kind of laying my brush down in that paint. Now side loading is a way to apply a very gradually blended shadow. This is a fairly small brush, so the problem sometimes is that the paint wants to travel along. So this would be, you want to match this to smaller items that you want to color. If you want to do a larger item, what you would do is you would clean your brush off, dampen it, and you would just go right along that edge that you want to soften out, and you can pull that shadow out a little bit more that way. So I'll show you that there on the tree. And you know, if you did have enough paint on the side, you could probably just go in with a wet brush and let it travel across the bristles, but I think I'm going to need a little bit of paint on there to make that happen because I don't have that much extra paint there. And I'll start where it's more shadowy, and usually at the base of a tree has a little bit more shadow. And oops, I think I need a little more water on my brush. Let's dampen that a little bit more so it can flow. And then you can just bring up that soft, subtle shadow up the side of a tree. Now you probably would want to paint this tree a lighter brown first and then do the shadow in a darker brown, but it gives you the idea of how to do that technique. Another fun technique that this is good for is doing water drops, and I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger than a typical water drop just so you can see it really well. So all I'm doing is just putting an oval on there with a watercolor pencil. You could use a regular pencil, it doesn't really matter. And then I am going to get some blue. I think I want some ultramarine blue because that one is a little easier to control than phthalo blue. So I'm just making a little puddle of that. And clean off my brush because we need to start with a clean brush. Okay, remember we're going to blot our brush so that we don't want it so dry that the bristles are splitting apart, but we want the sheen to be gone. That's about perfect. I'm going to load up just on the edge. I just want to get those like bristles on the side of that long side with paint in them. Hopefully that's good. And I'm going to start by adding the shadow on the inside. And we can work it a little bit more if we need to. This paper's a little rough, so I do need to work it a little bit. Get that nice soft look. Can also go in, if I feel like I have any hard edges, and of course I have that watercolor pencil there, I can go in and just soften it a little bit. And the bristles are fairly firm on this, so you can go in and lift easily. Okay, and then on the outside of our water droplet, we are going to also have a shadow. So I'm doing the exact same technique. I'm going to pick up paint just on that long portion of the bristles. I sometimes will start in the middle of my shadow if I know that's where it's supposed to be darkest. I'll pull it around. I should have matched my colored pencil a little bit better. And then we're going to go around this way. We need, if it drags, you need more water. Water is the vehicle in watercolor, so if we need to make our paint go more, we add more water. And just go back over it if you feel like it's not blending enough. But you want to use the full width. I'll move that up here and show you that again. Now, because these have shorter bristles in the dagger, you are going to have to reload more often. But it does have a lot of versatility on its own. You know, if I wanted to do some leaves on that tree, I could go ahead and get some green and just kind of tap and twist and give some really natural looking leaves. We have other brushes that do leaves a little bit better, but if you're out and you're painting and you don't want to stop and you've got one brush, you've got this angled brush, you could totally do a lot of different things with it. And if you have an angled brush, you know, try different things and see what you can do. So there's definitely a lot of different techniques you can do with that brush. Now, related to our angle, and probably a little more common, would be our flat and our bright. The difference between a flat and a bright is the length of the bristles. So our flat brush has longer bristles. It will hold more paint and it will go further. The disadvantage of the flat brush compared to the bright is that if you're using a thicker paint, such as a heavy-bodied acrylic, it doesn't have the strength to push that paint around. With watercolor, you'll probably find the flat to be more useful because you'd rather have it hold a lot of water, and it's really not that hard to push watercolor around, so having the extra paint capacity in a flat is a little bit better. A bright has the advantage of having more control while having that wide area that you can put paint on and push it around. So this is probably a little more useful for acrylics, but I'll show you both anyway. So let me load up this flat brush here with some paint, and I'll just kind of show you. You can get a couple different types of strokes with it. You can get a flat stroke, or you can get a fine stroke on the chisel edge. So super useful there. Of course, the steadier your hand, the straighter and a finer brush you'll get. It's kind of fun to do ribbons. Something I didn't notice, or I didn't mention to you, is to watch out for beads of water on your ferrule. You want to wipe those away, because if it slides down and gets into your paint while you're painting, you're going to have a blob. The other thing I want to mention, if you're using acrylic paints, try not to let the paint go more than halfway up the bristles. Once the paint gets up here to this metal part with acrylic paints or oil paints, it can dry inside the ferrule, inside that metal part, and when it dries it will spread out those bristles and it'll be impossible to get a nice sharp point to your brush again. So keep that in mind. So this is kind of fun because with a flat brush you can do ribbons. I could tell I need wetter paint because of how the brush wants to split apart there and drag and give me that texture. So I'm going to go in with wetter paint. You could do fun ribbons with that. And you can also do straight lines. And another thing I like with the flat brush is to do a wash. And let me just move that over. This isn't very expensive paper, so don't feel bad. I'm not wasting any paper, just experimenting. But totally, get some inexpensive watercolor paper and practice these techniques. A wash, this is really good for wetting a large area. I usually can do this with a round too, because your round in the set actually holds more water, but a lot of people like to do their washes with flat. So you wet the area you want your paint to go in, and then add your color. And then you can get them to blend together. You could put in a couple different colors. Or you could mix them and blend them together so you get a more uniform wash. When you start off with your paper wet, you have time to play and blend until you get exactly what you want. If you want to have some texture in that wash, you could drop in some drops of water, and then when that dries you'll get cute little ruffles, little blooms. It just gives you some texture. Just a fun technique. Now, since your bright isn't going to hold as much water, doing a wash isn't the best use of this brush. This brush is really good for when you want to like do very fine lines, like say you're doing the siding on a house, or the cracks in a rock, or the cracks between the logs in a log cabin. I mean, look how fine you can get those lines. Another fun thing you could do this would be like a checkerboard pattern. So let's say you're painting a, I don't know, picnic blanket or something. You could easily do a checkerboard. Oops, I need a little more water because I'm using watercolors. Obviously, you wouldn't need that water with acrylics. I think I've dipped into 2 different shades already here. That's all right, you're still going to see the technique. So you have that option with a bright. Because I'm a watercolorist mainly, I don't find as much use for a bright as an acrylic painter does. For an acrylic painter, a bright is an amazing tool to have because it allows you to push around that heavier paint. And even for an oil painter. The only thing you want to be careful of with the bright, I'm going to say it again because I really think this is so important, because if you take care of your brushes, they will last you a lifetime, or at least last you years and years. Acrylics are kind of hard on brushes, but you can really get a long life out of them. The trick is that the bristles are so short that it's hard to keep the paint off the ferrule. And you really just try to keep that paint off the ferrule and your brushes will last you a lot longer. The next 2 brushes I want to share with you are brushes that are great for doing fur and grasses, but depending on the medium you use, you're going to find that you use these brushes for different things. In watercolor, I tend to use fan brushes and rake brushes. That's what this one's called because it kind of looks like a rake. I tend to use these to give me either dry brushing, rough effects like weathered wood, or hair on an animal or grasses. So I'm using these for texture. If you're using these brushes in oils, for instance, you would use this fan brush, it's also called a fan blender, to smooth out skies and water. So you get 2 completely different techniques depending on the medium that you like to use. So I'm going to show you with this fan brush first what I like to do, and I'm going to grab a, I'm going to move this over like this so I get a fresh piece of paper. And actually, you know what, this will be better on my smoother paper, so I'm going to show you back here on the smoother paper. I am going to load this up with some brown like I would animal fur. Now you can do this again. This is a technique you could do with a flat brush, but you need to have your brush super dry so those bristles would spread apart. With this brush is very wet, those bristles want to spread apart anyway. So that you don't have to think about it. It kind of gives you that effect without you having to pinch your bristles or make sure your brush is dry. It's just a little easier way to do it. So you can see I get little rows of fine bristles, fine lines, that's what I want to say, and then you can hatch over them. But I really recommend that you practice with this brush to figure out how much paint and how much water you need to get the effect that you want. A lot of times I'll have some scratch paper off to the side and I will like maybe do a couple strokes until it's giving me the fine lines that I want, and then I will go over to my paper and I will go ahead and use it. So the caveat to these though is that you're going to get a lot of similar strokes that can look a little too repetitive. So what I would recommend doing would be to go back to your liner, which is this guy right here, okay? And then, of course, I'm not going to bother putting the handle on, but pick up the liner and then do a few strokes just on their own with a liner so you can kind of make it not look so samey. Give it a little bit more character. So that's how you use those brushes together, so you don't end up with an amateurish look. You end up with something that blends a little bit better, that's a little bit more seamless. So the fan brush will do a very similar effect. Let me do that in a different color though so you can see the difference. I think I'll do some red. That way it'll really look a little different. You can see here the brushes are clumping a little bit more, so I probably will dry these off just a little bit so they'll split apart. And then you get a little bit finer and softer of a line, because as I mentioned before, this is called a fan blender because it blends. And you do have to be careful because it will want to clump sometimes. Another thing I really like the blender for, the fan blender for, is that it does give you some interesting spatter. If like you're doing waves or something like that, you get some really cool spatter by going across the hairs. So if you're doing sea spray or something like that, you can get a really fun effect that way. So there's a couple ways to use the fan blender. And again, probably the most popular way to use it is if you're using oils or even acrylics that are like a slow dry acrylic, is that you would use this brush dry. Then you'd notice when it's dry, all the bristles just kind of fan out to a beautiful, like almost sheen, solid sheen of hair, and then you just work it back and forth until you've blended a background or a sky as much as you want. You can remove brush strokes with this brush. So it's a very versatile brush with completely different uses depending on what medium you're using. The next brush I want to show you is an odd little brush. It's called a Deerfoot Stippler, and I think I'm going to go back to our little tree that we painted because, and I'm probably just completely, I'm closing this on a wet background wash, that's alright. And this is a very interesting guy because it's got a round ferrule like our round brush, but it's got very short hairs and it's cut very bluntly at the end. You probably can't see the blunt cut there, but as soon as I load it up with some paint, you'll see what I mean. I don't want to use this really wet because this is more of a texture brush. I might need to have it a little wetter, but I'm just going to try it first. And see how it kind of looks like a deer hoof? Now this is really great for doing leaves or kind of brush around the base of a tree or something like that. So I could go ahead and add some moss around the bottom of this tree. And this is how you're supposed to use this brush. You're not going to hurt it. In fact, the more you tap with this, the more natural and better it's going to work. So so don't be afraid to use this Deerfoot Stippler. This is more of like a decorative painting type of brush, but it definitely has its uses. And then if you just want to get some texture and leaves up in the top of the tree, you can go ahead and do that. Just tap. And you can of course twist if you want it to look really random. You really do want to kind of twist it so that you get different sides of the bristles pointing out and you get a more natural look. But I'll give it some autumn leaves here, why not? But it's definitely a fun brush to play with. So try that when you want to get small bits of texture. And these brushes will come in different sizes. The set that I have, most of the brushes I would say are about between a 3 and an 8. So, you know, they're kind of your average size brushes, the most useful sizes you'd probably use in painting. But you can always find individual larger brushes that will do the trick. And I will link up to a few sets that are available from our sponsor Fab Art that are on special right now that you can have a look at, and you might find a set that's a little more useful. Like if you don't travel, you might not want to have the interchangeable brushes. The final two brushes I want to share today are, well, they have a couple different names. They can be called oval washes because they kind of have an oval shape. They can be called filberts because they're kind of shaped like a filbert nut. And sometimes they're called cat's tongues if they come to a point at the end. These are very useful brushes. And again, depending on the medium that you use, you may find you use them more often than others. For oil painting, I really enjoy filberts because it's a great way to blend small areas such as on skin tones and portraits, or anytime you want to get in there and smooth things out and not leave a brush stroke. The filberts are perfect for that. In watercolor, I love a cat's tongue because I get the benefit of 3 brushes in one. I get the benefit of a flat because I have a wide brush. I get the benefit of a round because I got the point, and I can kind of use almost like a magic wand to paint an entire picture. So I kind of saved the best for last. Well, you may think it is, you might think it's not. So let's first look at the oval wash or filbert because that has a very distinct oval tip to it. This can be useful for a lot of different applications. In watercolor, you probably use it more for petals. So what I'm doing is just getting a little bit of my my paint. I have the consistency of, I would say, maybe like 2% milk. And I can press and just make some really easy little petals. I am much more likely to use a filbert when I am oil painting. You can also do a center with a flower really easily with this. But I think this brush's strong suit would be for oil painters and just the brush stroke free blendability you can get. You can of course work on the edge and get a fine line. I'll show you that. And you can do some really fun leaves. So that's a filbert or oval wash. The cat's tongue I find to be much more versatile for watercolors, but I don't find it to be all that useful in oils or acrylics because the point on the cat's tongue isn't really preserved when you use a heavier bodied paint. So this one is definitely more applicable to watercolors. And a mark of a good brush is when you rinse it. And if you're in an art store and you're buying brushes and you're not sure if it's a good quality or not because there's so much sizing in it that you can't feel the bristles and tell, ask for a cup of water. If it's a good store, they should oblige. I don't know if the big box craft stores will or not, but most art stores will, so you can tell what you have for a brush. Now when I'm loading this sucker up, I want lots of juicy paint. Okay, add a little water to that. I want a nice puddle of like skim milk paint here. And with watercolors, we don't have to worry so much about the paint going up to the ferrule because it'll rinse out. It's never going to dry permanently. So with this, I have the benefit of going up on the tip. I can press down, get a nice wide wash. I feel like it's a sports car. You know, I can get all around these curves that I want to, and it doesn't hold as much paint as a brush that's got a bigger ferrule with more bristles and longer bristles, but you can certainly go quite a ways on a full load with this brush. This is also sometimes called a dragon's tongue or a lizard lick, depending on the brand that you're using, but it does fall under the category of an oval wash, but when it comes to a point like that, it's more commonly referred to as a cat's tongue. If you want that shape, you definitely want to look for the word cat's tongue or lizard's lick or something like that, and otherwise you may get just a rounded brush that doesn't come to a point. Like this one here, when I have this fully wet, it's not going to come to a point. It's still going to give me that rounded look. And both of these are in that set, so you could try your hand at all these different sizes for under $25. That's a pretty good deal, I think. I wanted to quickly show you what this little wrench is for in case you're confused, or in case you end up getting a ferrule stuck to the base of your brush and you can't get it undone. I haven't had that happen personally, but if that does happen, this little pin goes in the little hole in the ferrule. I guess it might happen if you had like acrylics or oil paints and maybe you didn't put your brush away right after and some oil seeped in there and made it stick. But all you do is just give it a twist. As you can see, it came off without any effort, but if you did have a situation where you had acrylics and maybe you didn't clean the brush as good as you thought and you ended up kind of adhering it there with your paint, that will get you out of that situation. Or if it's hard for you to grasp small barrels, this could help you as well, and that goes right there in that little spine area. So that's the nice thing about this brush set, is it's very well designed for travel and for keeping your brushes safe, because you can see that the bristles do not come near touching the outer lip of the case. I have to say, when I got this set, I didn't know what I was going to think about it. I've actually had it for almost a year while this product has been going under development, and it's kind of been hard not to share it with you because I really, now the more I use it, think it's a really fun idea and a great way to be able to have a bunch of brushes on you without worrying about damaging your longer handled brushes you have for your studio work. And they are so affordable that I think it's a great way to try these different shapes and then see what you think before you make some really high and costly purchases for brushes. If you'd like to find this brush set, I have a link in the video description as well as a coupon code to save you 20% at FabArt. They have several sets to choose from as well, and I will put links to all of those as well. Make sure you follow me on my blog, thefrugalcrafter.wordpress.com, because I will be giving away one of these sets so that you might actually win one. I think they make a really great Christmas gift as well. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions about any of the brush tips, or if there was any that I didn't mention and you're thinking about them, just leave it in the comments below and I'd be happy to help you out. Please give me a thumbs up and share this with any artist that you think might enjoy it. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.